on Sunday. I heard so much good news. Reading from the book of Philippians, which, by the way, was written when he was in jail. He was in jail a lot. Probably under house arrest because they didn't have ankle bracelets back in those days. But he's writing to the people in Philippi, which was a big trading city. And he says this: "Whatever was my profit, I now consider loss for the sake of Christ. What is more, I consider everything a loss compared to the surpassing greatness of knowing Christ Jesus, my Lord, for whose sake I have lost all things. I consider them rubbish, that I may gain Christ, and be found in him, not having a righteousness of my own that comes from the law, but that which is through faith in Christ, the righteousness that comes from God and is by faith. I want to know Christ and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of sharing in his sufferings, becoming like him in his death, and so somehow to attain the resurrection from the dead." The word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
Well, first of all, thank you, Cash, for that wonderful reading. I discovered when we were at the beach, we had our granddaughter with us, and we had just a wonderful time. But I decided that if I could crawl as fast as she could crawl, I'd give up walking. Man, she kept us on the run, but it's good to be back again. Where we're going over the next few weeks is pretty simple. Again, it was a suggestion from one of you guys. I don't know who this was, and I certainly don't want to embarrass anybody and ask about a hand. But it was kind of worded this way that, how do you, balance time with, and there was a whole litany of things that we all deal with. And as I'm reading it, this probably was not what they really meant, but I took it as, man, we're talking about priorities here. That's what this is all about. It's about priorities. And so this week we're going to kind of just talk about what priorities are in general. And then next week we're going to probably talk about what was the real focus of that initially, and that's how you deal with interruptions. And then we're going to kind of talk about the importance of how love plays in with our priorities. And, a life without priorities that have defined boundaries in them, is a lot like the way I clean house sometimes. And, real men clean houses. So sometimes, I'll start out, I'll get the vacuum cleaner out, and I'll start out and I'll think, well, I need to get, this over here needs cleaning, dusting or cleaning, so I'll put down the vacuum cleaner and then I'll go into another room to get the sponge or something to wipe with, and then I'm in there and there's something that needs attention there, the mail needs to be going through. So I'll start working on the mail, and that'll make me think I need to go shred something, and then I'll get back in the bedroom and there's something that needs to be done there. And so I ended up starting about 5 or 6 projects and accomplishing nothing. I got all this stuff half done. And so living your life without well-defined boundaries is just random and disorganized. It's not like it could be. Now, what do we mean when we say the word priority? What is a priority? Well, we could sit here and list out just hundreds, and I'm not exaggerating here, definitions for priorities, but I like to keep things really simple. And in my way of thinking, and probably in your way of thinking too, a priority is literally an intentional decision to make the main thing the main thing. Or it's an intentional decision to make the first place thing the first place thing. And let me, years ago, Stephen Covey, probably many of you know him, especially in the business field know him. And he wrote this landmark book called Seven Practices of Highly Effective People. And literally, it was kind of a discussion of priorities. And this is one of the things that he said about priorities, and I really like this. The bottom line is, when people are crystal clear about the most important priorities of the organization and the team they work with, and prioritize their work around those top priorities, not only are they many times more productive, they discover that they have the time they need to have a whole life. Not a fractured life, a whole life. And then he adds this, and this is what I really like. The key is not to prioritize what's on your schedule, but to schedule your priorities. Long time ago, I had this brilliant breakthrough. I discovered that there are only 24 hours in a day. There are no more than 24. There's no less than 24. And so it's essential that, given that we have that finite amount of time every day, that we learn to schedule our priorities. Our day and our week, and literally the moments that we have without living with a primary priority, is like my chaotic way of cleaning house. Random, disorganized. Here's the thing. There are always going to be, every single day, urgent things and important things that intersect our lives. And sometimes in life, and sometimes in our day, there will be urgent and important things. I mean, a child reaching for a hot stove, that's urgent. It's also important too, isn't it? But those moments generally are pretty rare. Most of the time, you and I are bombarded every day with lots of things that people are trying to insist to us are absolutely urgent and important. They may be urgent, but they may not be important. It's up to us to prioritize them. Having a core set of priorities is absolutely essential. So technically, and I'm not trying to get complicated, so hang with me this morning. Priorities are literally based on beliefs. And our beliefs directly affect our actions. And our actions are designed to produce results. What we say we believe is not always what we really believe. And the revelation of that will always come at the tail end of what I just told you. It's revealed through the results of our actions. They expose what our beliefs really are, and our priorities are our beliefs. So, several weeks ago, I was driving down the road, and I was listening, like many of you folks do, to K-Love. And on this K-Love station, there was, I cannot remember this person's name, and I confess I am not as up to date as I could be on contemporary music. But this person was a contemporary musician, and they asked him, he was asked a question, and it was framed this way. What is, they said, is Jesus the first priority in your life? This person said that they stopped for a little bit, and they didn't answer, and they just literally thought, and when they did that, they kind of did an assessment. He did an assessment in his mind. And after he started looking at how he spent his time, where he allocated his money, and the kind of relationships that he had and how he interacted with those relationships, He turned to the person that asked that question and said, as a Christian contemporary singer, no, Jesus is not first in my life. He said, at that moment, I made a conscious decision to dedicate my life to the process of making Jesus my priority. You may not like what I'm about to say, but I'm going to tell you, I believe it's full of heat. It's a lot more honest than most of us. Because if I was going to ask you today in here, in this place, around all these people here that we all know and love, is Jesus your number one priority? What's the answer I'm going to get? Yes! But you see, sometimes what we say we believe, is not revealed by what we say, but by our actions that produce results. Now, to me, it's absolutely clear, even a random reading of the Gospels shows us that Jesus possessed a clear, primary priority in his life that influenced his actions and produced results in his life that were absolutely pleasing to his Father. Now, there are probably a lot of illustrations, but one that just leaps off the page to me is in the Gospel of Matthew in the 22nd chapter, starting at the 34th verse. Let me give you a little background. Matthew tells a scenario where Jesus has interacted with the Sadducees, and he kind of showed them which way it was up. And so the Pharisees begin strategizing together, and this is what they come up with. They select, and I'm quoting here, an expert in the law who tested Jesus with this question. Teacher, what is the greatest commandment in the law? And I know we all know how he answered it, but wait just a second. Do you realize that there were probably 700 plus laws written in the Torah, written in the Mishnah, and then what they had orally among themselves? This was a setup. It was going to expose one of two things. Either what he didn't know or his bias. It was a setup. And what Jesus quotes was this. Matthew says that he said, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. That's not a belief. That's an action. Here's the interesting thing. What he was quoting from was Deuteronomy 6:5, which is called the Great Shema. Shema literally means listen, or this is important, or pay attention. And there's a whole bunch of those things scattered throughout the Old Testament. So this is what preceded that particular answer that Jesus gave in Deuteronomy, called the Shema, the Great Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. That's a belief. And for years, the real meaning of that escaped me. And then I ran across this Jewish commentary of that verse, and this is how people of the Jewish faith who know Hebrew and Aramaic way better than I do translate that. They translate it as, Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is alone. Meaning the Lord your God is distinctive. The Lord your God is separated. The Lord your God is not like anything in heaven, on the earth, or under the earth. That is what drove Jesus' actions, because he thoroughly believed that. And that's critical to Jesus. I think it's critical to us. I mean, you can love a lot of things. But if you really, really believe in the core of your heart that there is nothing like God, well, wouldn't you attempt to dedicate your life to prioritizing your actions to produce results that demonstrate that in your life? As far as Jesus was concerned, there was nothing in this life like his Father. It influenced what he said, what he did, and it produced results in his life that were altogether pleasing to the Father. Now, Paul comes out of the same mold. Here's the beauty. Our priorities can be similar. If our main priority is that simple truth that there's nothing like Jesus on the face of this earth, we can go about our actions doing things a little differently and still produce results that are pleasing to the Father. Paul was like Jesus. He had this fundamental core belief that produced actions that led to results in his life that were pleasing to God. And the epistles are a written proof or a testimony to that fact. They demonstrate that. So when we go back to what Cash was reading to us today in Philippians, Paul is looking at his life. And he's thinking about what he used to be, the status that he used to have before he knew Jesus as the Messiah. He was thinking of who he was then, what he did then, and how he acted then, and the results in his life. And he evaluated all of that where he was currently right there in Philippi with the fact that he knew that the Lord, his God, was all alone in the person of Jesus Christ, and through the fullness of God was pleased to dwell. I'm going to tell you something. He did not mince words when he responded. As far as Paul was concerned, everything in this earth was of comparative worthlessness compared to Jesus. In fact, the word he used is a little different than the word that Cash read for us out of the NIV. What Paul said was, in comparison to Jesus, everything in this world is dumb. A word that means refuse, scraps, filth. Let me tell you something. It is a vulgar term. It was vulgar then and it was vulgar now. And Paul used it as a shock treatment for those who were around him and listening to what he said, so that they would absolutely understand he was separating the immense and immeasurable value of Jesus from every other thing of lesser worth on this earth. And that belief shaped the actions of this man who was Saul of Tarsus, who became Paul, the disciple of Jesus Christ, the living Messiah. And there was probably, arguably, he became the most influential disciple and apostle and preserved the Christian faith for us who are in this room here today. Results. Based on a simple fact. There's nothing like Jesus. It's okay if we think about it. Is there really any benefit of having a first priority in life? As a Christian, is there any real benefit in having Jesus as your first priority? If nothing else, I submit to you this morning that it gives us a reliable GPS to guide us through this confusing maze of temptations that you and I face every single day as we try and keep the main thing the main thing. I said this before and here let me repeat it. Having Jesus as the ultimate priority in our life means that we don't end up having to spend all day long saying no to lots of different things. We just have to say yes to one thing. All our secondary priority beliefs should align with that core belief that Jesus is the most valuable thing on this earth. So if all of our core priorities align, it's like Jesus is this hub in a wheel, and the spokes of our secondary, primary focuses connect to that hub, and they have to align with it. If those priorities don't align with it, if they are shifted at weird and crazy angles, then pretty soon pressure will ultimately break those, and the whole wheel will collapse. Even a good priority, if taken above the primary priority of Jesus Christ, comes into our life, the wheel will break. And let me give you a great example. Jack was my best friend in high school. And you know, let's all admit it. Teenage boys make some stupid choices, don't they? Can I get an amen? Amen. You're looking at me. Jack and I, we were our best friends and also our worst support systems. We tried to outdo each other, making stupid choices in life. And after we probably caused our parents more heartache and pain than any parents deserve, Jack and I decided we were going to go to college together. Don't you know our parents were thrilled? So, we get to Western, and we had this plan. We played football together at Grimsley, in Greensboro, and we were going to be walk-ons that spring at Western. Well, I was in an automobile accident during the wintertime, and I was trying to rehab my knee, and I couldn't even try to go out. And Jack went out, and honestly, you know, I thought it was a waste of time, but anyway, Jack went out. Oh my gosh, you know what happened? He played so well and did so good. When it was over, Bob Waters said, I'm going to offer you a full ride next year. And he said, I tell you what, son, he said, you're the best cornerback I've ever seen. He said, you will be the number one person coming off the bench next year. And you'd have thought Jack's life was set up. Perfect. Would have been. No. He tanked. He ended up flunking out of school. Jack left, went back home. He floundered around working construction jobs for a while. And then he had some good friends of ours that became Christians. And they started talking with him about Jesus being the best thing that ever happened to them. And Jack began listening to them. And his wife began listening to them. And so they began attending church. And before you know it, Jack became a Christian. He told me he went down to the beach, he and his wife, and he was swimming in the ocean. And he said it was like God just spoke to him. I want you to go to Mexico. Now listen, Jack couldn't speak. He could barely speak English. So they go to Mexico. They're Protestants. You realize how many Protestants are in Mexico? Less than 3%. So they start this little house church in Mexico. And man, the Lord blessed it, blessed it, blessed it. Started growing and mushrooming. They became one of the fastest growing Protestant churches in all of the nation of Mexico. One of the largest Protestant churches in Mexico. And then the spokes of the secondary priorities were no longer aligned. The more the church grew, the more demands took place on Jack's life. The toll it took on his family and his wife. Until finally, he and Adrian divorced. I saw him not long after that happened. I'm going to tell you, Jack was the tough as they come. I never saw any emotion from him. But he fought back tears as he told me and explained to me. And then after I listened to the whole story, he looked at me directly in the eyes and he said, he kind of re-quoted a passage of Scripture to me. And he said, what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his wife? What's your priority today? What is your core, fundamental belief as a Christian? I know what you're going to say here. But our actions and the results of our actions are going to speak a lot.